I'm going to go ahead with the meeting beginning ritual now. 起立，面向佛堂，参加先鞠躬，一鞠躬，再鞠躬，三鞠躬，参加各位的传习鞠躬，开班一鞠躬，请坐下。
First, I wanted to take everyone through a recap of what we talked about previously in Chapter 10. And then I want to transition into that and demonstrate the linkage between 10 and 11. So, Chapter 10 is about power, but not power in the sense of, Man of Steel, The Dark Knight Rises, etc. Not that kind of power, but power in terms of the power of spirituality, the power of virtue. It's the kind of power that's very specific to sages, and we talked about how sages are able to manifest this power by effortlessly attracting people to him, arriving at the right answer, provide advice to people that bring them a measure of peace, and also, always seem composed in the midst of chaos, and so on. These are the great powers that sages possess. It is what we all wish we had. So it is mystical in nature. It seems mysterious because people can't figure out how is it that some people seem to have this wisdom and other people don't. And how do you arrive at this kind of wisdom? How do you attain this kind of power? So before heading into that, I know that some people who are listening in, but perhaps haven't heard me talk about this before, will say, it all makes perfect sense because, after all, the Tao Te Ching is literally the book of the way and its power. So there you go. It's all about power. And that's when I will say, no, that's actually a very bad translation of the title. Yes, it's commonly accepted. Yes, it appears in Wikipedia. It's still a really bad translation. So Tao Te Ching, the original title, it's just the classic of the Tao and virtue. One of the possible meanings of virtue is power, as in by virtue of something. You enable something else. That's the power there. So, the Tao Te Ching, the middle character, cannot be translated as power. One of the contexts of that character is power. So that's where that is. Because of that, it's a very bad translation that's floating around. Okay, so how do we gain this power? Whatever the translation issues may be, how do we gain this power? And we talked about how Chapter 10 speaks of a meditative state. So it's important to note that meditation, what we commonly know as transcendental meditation, those are practices that come into this country from India. So from China, you have a variety of different meditative states that you can follow. Some passive, like sitting meditation. You can either be sitting on the floor. There's even sitting meditation where you literally sit and you let the mind go quiet. But there's also active forms of meditation, which may include Tai Chi. Tai Chi in Chinese is Tai Chi Quan. So the real pronunciation in Chinese, the second character is a J sound, Tai Chi Quan. It doesn't really matter to the sages which one you pick. It does matter to the sages that you pick one. It doesn't have to be Qigong, it doesn't have to be Tai Chi, it doesn't have to be transcendental meditation, sitting meditation, also known as Zazen. Zazen in Chinese is called 坐禅. It doesn't have to be any of those. The important thing is to have some sort of practice. It can be something that does not resemble meditation from the perspective of the conventional viewpoint. For instance, you can set aside time every day for silent contemplation, self-reflection. That's a meditative state. You're going to want to practice getting into that state by breathing and relaxing, which are talked about, referred to in Chapter 10. But that's a meditative state there. I myself, when I walk, when I take a hike, I like to do that in a meditative state. It's very enjoyable. I also enjoy doing writing in a meditative state. Sometimes I write with a specific purpose in mind. I'll write about a particular topic. Other times, I write whatever comes to mind. So I hope everyone sees the difference between the two. Writing to express something, or writing to receive something, writing to channel something. When you do the channeling, when you allow yourself to be a conduit to whatever is coming through you, that can be a very powerful and transforming experience. And you don't necessarily need to subscribe to the supernatural. So it isn't necessarily a deity or Satan, as the case may be, that is speaking through you. It could be your subconscious or your higher self. Whatever works for you. So there are specific elements. I mentioned breathing. I mentioned concentrating, focusing on something, or focusing on the void. And I mentioned also relaxing like an infant, to be soft like an infant. Some of that we will do next time in the guided visualization on emptiness. So another way that we talked about from previously was to interact with the world like a sage. This is where I would challenge everyone to not accept anything blindly, especially dogma, especially inflexible dogma. So be sure to get into the habit of asking, why does it really make sense? And who made up that rule? If a rule has been created, it's most likely created by a human being. And if some human being created that rule, you as another human being, you have just as much power to examine that rule and maybe overturn that rule for yourself. So not all the rules in the world come from divine sources. I would say all of them come from human sources. So always question rules, always question authority. And lastly, think like a sage. This is where we talk about empathy and harmony. So the sages have the ability to understand what it looks like from different perspectives other than your own. So these are actually related to what we're going to talk about today. So one of the stories that's connected to the teaching today is all about the ability or the discipline to cultivate yourself, to practice cultivation, to build on yourself, to create a spiritual foundation, and then a spiritual first floor, and then a spiritual second floor, so that you are ready to build the third floor. And the third floor, metaphorically, that's the one with the commanding view of the surroundings, which represents, in sort of a storybook metaphorical format, it represents the view of the enlightened, the clarity of the enlightened. If you have practiced some of these things, and you haven't before, you've tried to examine everything around you with your critical faculties, your reasoning abilities. If you have tried to look at things from different perspectives, to try to put yourself in someone else's shoes, if you have picked a meditative practice, whereas you didn't have one before, I would be very interested to hear about what differences it has made in your life. If you haven't done that, it's not too late. In the week following today, I would invite you to consider putting some of this into action. So for now, let's delve right into chapter 11. So here we are, chapter 11. Here's what it says. 30 spokes join in one hub. In its emptiness, there is the function of a vehicle. Mix clay to create a container. In its emptiness, there is the function of a container. Cut open doors and windows to create a room. In its emptiness, there is the function of a room. Therefore, that which exists is used to create benefit. That which is empty is used to create functionality. So a short chapter, basically, and you guys know that I'm always interested in talking about structure. In this case, I'll do a little bit differently. Here's what I'll do. I'm going to point out these 3 lines and then draw your attention to the Chinese, and then have you take a look at the similarity between these 3 lines. So in Chinese, it is actually important to make sure that the structure is correct because it is supposed to match. So the matching isn't strictly speaking that you have to have X number of characters per line and then the next one has to match that. The structure can vary from one chapter to another. But within that chapter, there's always some consistency to it. That is how the poetic structure of the Tao Te Ching works. So in this case, I just want to draw your attention before we even talk about the individual characters. If you take a look at the beginning 3 characters of line 2, and then compare that to the beginning 3 characters of line 4, and then compare that to the beginning 3 characters of line 6. And I hope that you have drawn the obvious conclusion that these are all one and the same. These are all exactly the same characters. And I hope that you have already mapped that to the English translation, and you can easily see that for all 3, we have translated them exactly the same in line 2, line 4, and line 6 in its emptiness. So this is a very literal translation. The original Chinese has 3 characters. The translated English has 3 words. So you can sort of probably guess that there is a one-to-one correspondence between the English and the Chinese. And if you were to guess that, you will be correct. There is. So you can literally say that the first character will be the prepositional in, and then the second character will be the possessive its, its, and then the last character there will be the emptiness. So, and let me be very specific. This last character has a special place in the Tao. This is the character for wu, meaning not having any, not having anything, not possessing anything, having nothing. Wu. Same here, and same here. And this is, in fact, the same character that goes into wu wei. So we talk about wu wei quite a bit. It's a central concept in the Tao. So here it shows up again. In fact, this character shows up throughout the entire Tao Te Ching. The idea of not having anything, the idea of emptiness. There are other characters that also depict the same concept. So the other major character that depicts the concept of emptiness is Kong, which you can think of as KONG. But if I say KONG, you might think, Kong, like King Kong. But it's actually Kong. It starts with an O sound, even though it's spelled like KONG. It doesn't rhyme with Hong Kong, which rhymes with King Kong, and also Donkey Kong. Okay, I've taken it probably a little bit too far. You get the idea. All right, so Kong is more of a Buddhist term. So you don't see that in the original Tao Te Ching, which is from 2,500 years ago. You will see that in Qing because Qing is from like half of that long time ago. It's like 1,400 years ago, by which time Buddhism had already been spread into mainland China. So people become very familiar with the concept of Kong. And in the Qing, Kong, the Buddhist concept of emptiness, and Wu, the Taoist concept of emptiness, are weaved together to be identified as being one and the same. Okay, so here, this is the important thing to note is that this is predating any of the influx of Buddhist concepts of emptiness into China. So the original sages were already talking about this. In fact, this all started probably 4,800 years ago. So you see them predating the Buddha, the Indian prince who became the Buddha, predating him. by more than 2,000 years, probably 2,300 years or so. So this is the most significant 3 characters in terms of structure of this entire chapter. Let's take a look at some of the other characters. You would also notice, sticking on the same lines, you notice that they are all the same. Okay, and then you will notice that the translation, it always goes like, there is the function of, there is the function of, there is the function of. So the similar characters are translated as that, but the ordering of the words in English is different from the ordering of the words in Chinese. So this is because in Chinese, there isn't an exact equivalent to the English word of. The English word of in Chinese is always apostrophe S. Apostrophe S meaning this guy here. So there are other possible characters to translate that, but in terms of Chinese syntax, think about this. If you say the book of John, or John's book. Okay, I'm talking about something that's very similar, but the ordering is different. The book of John, the book belonging to John, the book that is owned by John, so to speak. So the book comes first, John comes after. And if I say John's book, I'm expressing the same relationship between the owner and the owned, and the book, the object. But the order is different. So that's English syntax. You can express it in those 2 ways. Sometimes it sounds better to say it one way than to say it the other way. Now, and you know, so if you do writing, if you do a lot of writing, you know that there's going to be times when you want to mix and match the 2 skillfully. So you don't want to use of too many times. You know, the greatest of the top players. So this is apostrophe S, and the last character, yong, it means use, usefulness, utility, function, functionality. So let me repeat that. I think there might have been a stutter, the audio. The last character here, yong, it means use, usefulness, utility, functionality. So it's all about making use of something, utilizing the functionality provided by something. And that's apostrophe S here. So this whole thing is a function, which has to be translated a little bit differently to sound okay in English. Then you're also going to notice that the character here in the middle, it's always the same. This one here in line 2, this one here in line 4, and this one here in line 6. They're all the same. Yo, it means to have something, to have, to possess, or there is something that is in place, that something is existing. So oftentimes, you would use the 2 characters together to talk about the things that you have and the things you don't have. So, but that's in sort of like everyday speech. So these characters are very much used in Chinese today. So what it says is that here we have one character that is different, as you can see, and that's always talking about the thing, the object. So here, so this means in ancient times this is a carriage. In modern times it's a car. So it is saying, quite literally, in its emptiness, it has, or there is, a carriage's functionality. So that's one way to say it. If you want to follow the sequence of the Chinese character, we will say it like that. But obviously, to make it sound a little bit better, instead of saying that it has the car's functionality, we would turn it around a little bit to make it sound a little more smoother. In English, there is the function of a vehicle. If you prefer, there's the utility of a vehicle. There is the functionality of a vehicle. And I picked the word vehicle, as you can see, because of, in the interest of making this more generic and broadly appealing. So a vehicle could be a carriage. You know, if you were to go visit Central Park in New York, you will still see that being used. Very romantic outing, and for you and a loved one. But today, it's definitely more like a car. But it could be a conveyance. It could be transportation. So what about this right here? So instead of a car, we have this character. This can be, in modern Chinese, this character means a tool, a general tool. In ancient times, it's much more specific. It's talking about a vessel that contains things, like a bottle, a jug, something that contains. So it's a container, basically. So again, in the interest of making this more generic, I use container, I use vehicle, more generic terms. And then lastly, we have a character here. This character is the same in modern Chinese as it is in ancient times, used the same way in both today and previously. It's all room. So just a little bit more about the characters, then we'll dive into the meaning, which is, I think, is the central piece of this particular chapter. So I want to characters that should be very familiar. So this character here, I hope everyone by now knows what that is. It's the simplest possible Chinese character of all. It is the character for one. And it shows up in the translation here. Now, the character for two will be two horizontal lines. The character for three, well, here it is, three horizontal lines. So if that is the character for three, then what about the character that follows that? Can anyone make a guess, knowing that the translation here translates it as 30? It is the character for 10. So this is kind of a simple character to create. Anyone can write this character by drawing a cross, and then you can tell your friends that, see, I know Chinese. But you didn't know I know Chinese, right? I know this Chinese character. Okay, so so part of this works sort of like, if you think about like the Roman numeral system, this is a lot simpler than that. So if I were to attempt to express 11, I would simply write this. I would write the 10, and then I would write the 1. That's 11. Okay. So if I wanted to write, so here I have 10, right? So 3 10 means 30. What if I want to say 13 instead of 30? Not a trick question. Yeah. You would write the 10, and then you will write the 3. So the pronunciations are also relatively easy. One is yi, like yi. 3, san, like san. 10 will be 10 will be 10. Sorry, getting my English and Chinese mixed up. 10 will be 10. So if I wanted to say 30, I would say 30. I wanted to say 13, I would say 13. So that's how easy it is to master the numbers in Chinese. Now a little bit more about 10. So one thing that is common between Eastern and Western culture is the emphasis on the character 10. So there is one way that it is used. This character is used in one particular way that is not used in the West because of its shape. So I can say 十字, which means the character of 10. But what I'm saying is that I am referring to the symbol like this, the symbol of the cross, because that's what it looks like. So if I say, specifically, if I say 十字架, I'm talking about the cross. Now, so in terms of regular, normal, everyday expressions, the similarity between the two cultures has to do with the assignment of the value of 10 as being a good score, like 10 out of 10. That's the perfect score. So we would say, in English, we say 10 out of 10 or perfect 10. And sometimes we would say, oh, she's a 10, or he's a 10, or whatever, right? So 10 is the perfect score. So in Chinese, it's similar. We would oftentimes say 十全十美. That means perfect. It means that similar expression in Chinese.
Derek, how about for like first, second, third? What's the translation for?
Yeah. So you would add the character D. DI, that's the character for ranking. So you would put that in front of the number. So I mentioned that 1 is E, put D in front of it, DE, it turns it into first. So the character for 2, 二, if I say 第二, second. Here, the character for 3 is 三, 第三, third. So the appealing thing about that is that everything is arranged in a logical fashion. So you, for instance, will not need to learn a different spelling for a new word because, for someone who's not a native speaker of English, sometimes we forget that it's not intuitively obvious to them that first means first. It means number one, right? Easier for us to tell them number 1, number 2, number 3, and then, oh, okay, I understand what that means. But second, isn't that a unit of time? Why is second the second place? We forget that it's not intuitively obvious. Or, if you think about the word 11, it's not to someone who's not a native speaker, it is not as sensible as adding together 10 and 1. 11, I have to learn another word, I have to figure out how to spell it. We forget sometimes that's not really simple. All right, so I'm going to limit my discussion of the characters to just that because I want to get to the meaning of this chapter and not admire too much in the individual characters. What I hope to do there was just to showcase some of the simple characters. There are people who tune specifically to learn a little bit more about Chinese. So let me talk about these the meaning of these 3. Okay. So what it's saying is that, well, when you have that empty space for the axle to fit through to a wheel, then that gives you the utility of transportation. So the car can be a car, a carriage can be a carriage. And when you have a container, any kind of a container, the empty space within it allows you to use it as a container. You can use it to hold things. Maybe your meal, maybe a drink of something. And it's the same way with a room, but this is not so much talking about the space inside a room. It's extending the example again to say that to access the room, you can build a room with empty space inside, but if the walls are solid, then you don't have a way to go inside to use the room as a room, obviously. So this is talking about doors and windows. So here, in the second example, when it's talking about a container of things, it's talking about the emptiness, like the emptiness in a bowl. Now, when we talk about a room, it's talking about the appropriate placement of openings. So, for example, the window cannot be too big, cannot be too small, has to be just right. The door, same thing, you have to position it, it has to be human size. If it's too small, if the door is too small, maybe it's okay for dogs and cats, but it's not good enough for a human being. If the window is opening on top, for instance, and there isn't a whole lot of waterproofing, then when it rains, that room becomes flooded. So these are skillful, appropriate placement of openings. That's the third one. So let me say that this is all about the Tao. So when we look at this, the first thing we have to do is to think about how this is literally true everywhere we look. That the Tao principle that we often explore is universal in nature, and therefore it has to apply universally. So first of all, there, anything that holds anything needs emptiness within. I hope that makes sense. Could be a box. Could be a box of any size. Could be a container. Any kind of container. Could be any kind of a cup, any kind of glass. Any kind of container requires emptiness within in order to contain. So extending the example to cover universally all vehicles, not just cars, not just carriages, any kind of conveyance, any kind of transportation, any kind of wheel needs an axis in order to function, in order to work as a wheel. And you can even extend this beyond if you learn from the overall concept what we have to look at any kind of emptiness. A car can be a container of passengers. Therefore, there has to be space in the car to allow the passenger to sit. I know that seems kind of obvious, but I've had friends who put so much junk that before I get in to the cars, it's always like, hold on 1 second. I'm so sorry. Hey, I know my car's messy. Just wait, give me 1 second. And then I see him frantically moving stuff from the back seat to the trunk, and then pushing from one side of the back seat to the other side, like there's not enough space in the trunk. So freeing up one space. Okay, now I can sit. So it's that sort of idea. So any kind of transportation with or without wheels requires some sort of space within for the driver, the pilot, or the passenger, or the passenger. Sometimes the payload. When I think about that, one example would be, hey, like the drone flying overhead, flying in the skies of Afghanistan. The drone does not have room for a pilot or a passenger, but it does have room for payload. Sometimes very deadly payload, weapons, basically, and sometimes extremely destructive weapons. But it has to have the space for that. That's the general idea. So, extend all the containers to cover all the cups, all the bottles, anything that holds liquid, all the boxes of any size. It could be as large as a shipping container or beyond, or as small as a jewel box, for diamonds, for instance. This is a universal principle. And think about it. Somewhere between shipping containers and jewel boxes, you have household furniture like cabinets. You have shelves. All of these will contain. They all have space to contain things to help you organize them. So the first thing to do when looking at this chapter is to apply what it says universally. And if we look around right now, we're likely to see many containers of a similar description. Here in this.
Let's go ahead and do the meeting ending ritual, everybody. 起立，面向佛堂，持架三鞠躬，一鞠躬，再鞠躬，三鞠躬，持架规则是一鞠躬，接班一鞠躬。Okay, everybody, we are done.
Participate in the Tao meeting by joining us online. For information, go to Taoism.net/Tao